Welcome back to the channel and part one of the electrical rewiring of a 1968 Mustang. Now the reason I have to do this, as you are all well aware, is I have added a number of items to the vehicle that demand power. Now these things include things like the power seats and the power windows and of course the power top. On top of that is going to be an aftermarket stereo with a trunk mounted amplifier. So there's a number of things that are going to require power. The new heater is a new heater air conditioning now, so again that has increased power demands. So how do we handle that? Well, we obviously can't use the original wiring. I mean, the original wiring was designed for some very simple rudimentary items like hazards and a radio, not a stereo, but a radio. And the idea is the wiring won't handle that demand. So how do we handle the demand? Well, what we need to do is we have to take the old fuse box and remove it. We need to replace it with something that can deliver the power I need to drive all of the accessories in this vehicle, and I can't rely on the original wiring to do that because it simply doesn't have the gauge to do it. So how do we approach this? So what we do is we have to bring in our own power. So the first thing you're going to need to do, and you can get this from an aftermarket car stereo shop, and really all it is the battery terminal. But it's a battery terminal that has a number of ports on it. That allows me to have a number of different wires coming out of the back of it. Now in this case I'm going to need one wire specifically for the solenoid that drives the starter. So one wire will come out of the port, jump over to the solenoid, and it's done. The second port is going to be used for the line coming into the fuse box. So what's going to happen is I'm going to drive a fuse block underneath the hood. That 6-gauge line is going to come into the fuse block, it's going to exit the fuse block to protect it, and then I'm going to bring that 6-gauge line into the car. It will then connect to one of the circuits of my fuse box. Now it's a rather large fuse box, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this fuse box on a hinge. So I'm going to create a hinge, very simple hinge, with a bit of a key lock, and not a key, but just a twisty lock. And it's going to allow me then to swing this out of the way. And if I need access to it, I simply release it, it drops down, and it's a lot easier to access than the original one was, I can tell you that. But the idea is this fuse box then will be fed that constant power directly from the battery and will energize these 6 fuse circuits. And that'll be my constant power circuits, right? So that'll feed all of the things that need constant power. In my case, the constant power are things like the interior lights and of course the power port, which is something I'll talk about in a second. The power seats will have power all the time. Hazards, brakes, like all the things again. But the alarm and door locks, again, I'll get into that in a few seconds. So it has constant power. It also has a rather large relay, and this relay then feeds off of the constant power and then delivers power to the second set of 6 fuses, which are going to drive the switched items in the car. And that includes the heater air conditioning, which of course is an additional demand. I've got the stereo dash cam, which I'll talk about in a second, power windows, power roof, the ignition system, etc. And the way this is going to work then is, remember the way the car is originally wired. There would have been a wire coming from the battery coming inside of the cab. One part of that would go and feed the constant power to the fuse, which again ran the constant power items. A tap would then go to the ignition switch, which when you turn the key on, would then activate a second line which would run to the second part of the fuse box, which would then activate your accessories, which again were your radio or the heater. In my case, that wire that comes from the switch, I'll simply use it to trigger my relay. So now I've dropped the demand on the electrical wiring of this car because it no longer has to bear the load of anything other than a relay, which is a very low load. But now I have a switched, unswitched circuit. I also have a ground block. Now remember, this is a large fuse box, but it will be out of the way. But the idea now with a ground block is anything I need to ground under the hood, I can do that through the block rather than running around trying to find a metal piece to screw into. So I'll have a permanent ground block that I can use. So although rather cumbersome, this is a perfect solution for what I need. So now as far as what are we driving off of this fuse box? So I've mentioned a power port. So one of the things I'm adding to the vehicle is this power port is going to go into my console where my garage door is. Everybody who knows the 67, 68s had a center console. that center console had a garage door that gave you a cubby, right, which is more of like a glove box. But the idea is that door opens up. Now, if you open up the door 80% of the way, you still have access to the cubby, but this will be right at the top, which means then if you open the door just that other 20%, you now have a power port for your phone charger, a couple of USB ports, again, just for things for charging, GPSs, whatever you're going to add to the vehicle, you now have a great place to plug them in. So that's one of the things I'm adding. A couple of other things I'm adding. I have a warning beeper, and what this warning beeper is for things like where you leave, when you turn the key off and you've left your headlights on or anything like that. So, just the standard beeper. I'll be putting that into the circuits. I have a adjustable flasher because I'm using the sequential LED taillights, which means when you put the brakes on or when you have the hazards on or when you put the signals on, the brake lights sequence. Now, there's a time to that, right? They have to be sequenced for a certain amount of time. This is perfect. I can adjust that so that when the signal is on, I'll get the cascading sequential lights and I can control the duration of that. Kill switch. I'm going to be putting an ignition kill switch in. And what is a kill switch? Very simple to do. Your coil has a positive and negative side. The negative side the positive side has power all the time. When you turn the accessories or when you turn the key on, that energizes the positive side of the coil. That's why these cars were so easy to steal. If you had a wire with a couple of alligator clips, you would clip it onto the battery, you would clip it onto the positive side of the coil, it's now activated, and then you use a screwdriver to jump across your solenoid and this car would start. I mean, that's as simple as that. I'm going to put a kill switch in, and all this is going to do is ground out the coil, which means the way a car works is that the ignition points would actually interrupt the ground, and that would then create the cascade with inside of the coil and fire the spark plugs. In my case, if you turn this on and simply ground the coil out, when you try to start the car, there's no cascade, there's no spark, right? So very simple, but this is just a added layer of protection on the car. But what am I doing actually to protect the car? What I've done is I've went out and I purchased an alarm. Now, this alarm is a standard alarm, what means you put it in the car and it monitors the doors, it monitors the hood, it monitors the trunk. It makes sure that nobody is trying to gain access to the vehicle. Another thing it does, obviously, it determines whether or not the car has been hit or whether the car is being moved. All of these will create an event which will then activate the alarm. One of the cool things that I found that came with the alarm were door lock actuators. So it actually comes with door lock actuators. So this alarm has a remote, which means I can arm or disarm the alarm with a remote. But at the same time now, if I lock or unlock the alarm or arm or disarm it, it will now lock or unlock the car. Very simple in these cars, as you know, right? When you put the key in to unlock the car, all you're doing is moving a rod back and forth, right? You turn the key to the left, the rod pulled, which means it locked. You turn the key to the right and unlocked, or vice versa, I don't know which. But basically, I can put the actuator in that to just simply move that rod, which will lock or unlock the door. Very simple to do. And in that case, now I've got door locks. So I've got door locks, and I have the ability now to arm or disarm remotely. But there's another benefit that I'm going to add. I also have a delay circuit. Now, what a delay circuit is it's a circuit that's simply activated by a 12-volt pulse, which means if you give it 12 volts, it flips a relay on and will keep that relay on for a set amount of time, let's say 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and you can choose which one you want. So now it'll keep a circuit alive for 30 seconds. In my case, the circuit I'm going to keep alive is going to be the interior lights and the fog lights. Why is that? So it's nighttime, I'm approaching the vehicle, I disarm the alarm, at the same time the actuators unlock the doors, and that event then triggers the timer. That timer turns on come the interior lights, and on come the fog lights. Now, for that 30 seconds now, as I approach the vehicle, the car is illuminated, I can see inside the vehicle, I can see around the vehicle, it lights my path, I open the door, I gain access, I close the door. If that 30 seconds hasn't expired yet, or I can turn it to 45 seconds, doesn't matter, the interior lights are still on, and the fog lights are still on, which means I can see if anybody's approaching the vehicle. The interior lights are on, I can still see, and I can get my keys and put it in ignition. And as soon as I turn the ignition to on, what happens is the switch power comes on, and that switch power turns off the delay circuit. So now the interior lights go out, just like a modern car, right? You get into your car today, you open the door, you get in, you close the door, the lights stay on. Same thing is going to happen in this car. So like I said, part of that whole circuitry will be part of the alarm system. Now, what's the next thing I'm doing? Well, the next thing is that I want daytime running lights on this car. That means I want that as I'm driving during the daytime, I want something in the front of the car that is going to say, I'm coming, don't pull out in front of me. Now, I can use the running lights, but I find that those are ineffective. So, what am I going to do? When I turn the car to on, I'm going to then have the system automatically turn the fog lights on, which means the fog lights will be on with the car running during the day. And as I'm driving along, the fogs are on, people see the car coming, which is great. But then at nighttime, when I pull the headlights on, by pulling the headlights on, that relay will shut down the fog lights, and now the fog lights go out, headlights come on, and I drive with headlights, which is normal for the car. You're driving around with headlights. Of course, I have high and low beam. But the other thing is I also have a fog light switch in the car, which will just override that, which means during the night when the headlights are on, normally the fogs are off, I'll be able to pull the fog lights on, and now I have the full running lights on, which means I should be able to light the sky up with this car as I'm going down the road, which is important to me. Again, making sure that you don't get into any trouble with these cars is more important because the safety on these cars is minimal. As you know, I've been doing a lot of things to the seats. I'm going to be putting in a shoulder belt. I mean, you got to keep the people safe inside these cars. So, like I said, so that's the next thing that's happening. Now, let's talk about some of the aftermarket stuff I'm putting in the car. Obviously, aftermarket stereo. So another one of those ports is going to be used because I'm going to run, obviously, a power line into my trunk. So it's protected. It has its own fuse. It'll come off of one of the other ports on that block connector on the battery, and then just runs into the trunk and connects to my amplifier. Easy to do. Obviously, I've got RCA cable that's got to run back there. I've got a lot of wiring that has to run around this car. So what I did is I picked up some fabric tape. This is not electrical tape. I'm not going to be using electrical tape, right? I'm going to be using heat shrink wiring, and I'm going to be using wiring terminals, right? No pigtails with tape, right? This is simply that after I've got all the wiring laid in, and it's going to all of the accessories that I needed to go to, I'm going to be able to wrap it, right, to re-wrap the harness so that it's clean and neat underneath the hood or underneath the dash. The other thing I've got is I've got this the alligator wire, cable, right, which is that plastic. You put the wiring in and it protects the wiring. Like I said, got to protect the wiring in the vehicle. So those are the things that I'm going to be adding as well. So now, speaking of wiring, so I have a couple of quick disconnects. Now, what are these for? These are for my power seats, right? So when I install the power seats, I can just power them up because they just need negative and positive, and that's it, right? The switch does all the motion. So in this case here, I can take this now, put it in the seat. So if I ever have to take the seats out of the car, I can do that, right? So these are part of the wiring that I'm doing as well. And finally, stereo dash cam. So what I did is I found a rear view mirror that looks just like any average rear view mirror. As you know, I have the dye, which is the spray, which is the color of the interior. So I'll be able to spray the back of the rear view mirror with that color to make it look more original. But really what this mirror is, it's a dash cam. So it has a dash cam lens on the forward facing side. It has a regular looking mirror on the interior side, so it's a mirror. And it also comes with a camera that mounts on the license plate so that it also records anything from behind. So the camera records everything in the front, everything in the back. But one of the great features is that when I throw the car in reverse and the reverse lights come on, that same trigger then triggers an LCD to illuminate behind the mirror. It's a one-way mirror, so as soon as the LCD lights up, you can see it through the mirror. And what that allows me to have then is a backup camera, because one of the things that is devastating to these cars is you back into a spot and there's one of those concrete poles or there's something there that you didn't see over the back of the hood. I'll be able to see it. So it has that availability as well. Now, why am I doing all this today? Because the car is not painted. I can do whatever I want to the car. If I have to run wiring up through the A-pillars and bring it across the top of the windshield so I can power up the mirror, now's the time to do it if I have to drill a hole or if I have to do anything. So the key is to do all of this, figure this all out. Where are all the wiring going? I mean, I'm going to change the alternator, obviously, so that I can keep up with this demand. I'm going to go with what's called a one-wire alternator, which means I no longer need the regulator, so I've got to bypass the regulator. The battery will simply be charged directly from the alternator, which is fine for me. So like I said, a lot of things coming up. So what's on the next video? The next video is for me to take the old wiring harness, bring it up, and we're going to go through the wiring harness. We're going to make sure all of the wires are still pliable. We got to make sure that there's no nicks, that somebody hasn't gone in here 30 years ago and cut things, so we have to clean all this up. Next thing we're going to do is identify all of the wires that go to the fuse box so that I can identify the key wires that'll be used for my trigger, for my relay. I can identify the wires that then feed all of the other circuits in the car, because we still have those circuits. I still have brake lights. I still have hazards. So I still need to feed those circuits. So we'll have to identify those, and we are going to cut out the old fuse box and introduce the new fuse box. So that's going to be in the upcoming videos. I hope you join me. If you're interested in doing the same kind of things for your car, just let me know. I can let you know where I got all of these things, and so that you can get them as well. But until then, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.